Hello people, I am Jaby KOAY, joined by Aninya, and she is a big Bollywood fan that I met at the gym. And so we are going to talk about Masaan. It's a film starring Vicky Kaushal as well as Richa Chadha.
Richa Chadha.
Richa Chadha. As well as a number of other people. Sanjay Mishra is another actor, as well as Pankaj Tripathi. If you guys don't know anything about this film, I'm going to read you the IMDb real quick. 4 lives intersect along the Ganga, a low-caste boy hopelessly in love, a daughter ridden with guilt of a sexual encounter ending in a tragedy, a hapless father with fading morality, and a spirited young child yearning for a family long to escape the moral constructs of a small town. That's a pretty good summary of the whole thing. The main interest I had in watching this was Vicky Kaushal, because as you guys know, I'm a big fan of his work. I've watched him in multiple different films now, and I got the chance to interview him, which made me want to watch this even more. I really enjoyed this film. And you had no idea what this was initially, right?
Yeah, and to be really honest, I haven't seen a lot of Vicky Kaushal. When I was back in India, I just saw one movie, which was Love Per Square Foot. That was a Netflix movie.
Yeah.
So that's as much as Vicky Kaushal I've seen. And I'd heard so much about Masaan that I was like, Jaby, you gotta watch Masaan.
That was my main thing going into this, was him and just watching him act. He's such a good actor. He, really assimilates whatever that character is. I believed him in this role just like I believed him in every single other role I've seen him in. He does a good job of playing that innocent small town boy or guy in this instance, and he falls in love with a girl. You see all this in the trailer. Their relationship is really cute. The twists and turns that the film takes is very unexpected. I won't say what, of course. Maybe we'll do a spoiler section of this video later on, but right now we're keeping it spoiler free. And then on the other side you had Richa
Chadha.
Yeah.
And she has this very interesting but rather muted role, I thought. I've seen Richa Chadha in some of her previous movies, and she has a lot to say, a lot more lines, and she's like a very feisty woman in her previous movies, but in this one it was rather muted in terms of the number of lines that she had. I mean, she was still like that small town feisty young adult, but in a rather muted way.
I like that because it all had to be conveyed, through physicality, through her emotions, through her expressions, and I think that's a lot harder to give to the audience than giving it to them in dialogue.
I felt that the same for Vicky Kaushal too. The tone of the movie was rather muted, I'd say. Vicky Kaushal and Richa Chadha, I think 2 of the 4 stories didn't have many lines, and they were saying so much with just their facial expressions.
Well, I think there's 2 things going on there potentially. Number 1 is it's more realistic, and number 2 is it also probably speaks to the repression that these characters experience. There's a lot going on in this film, and it doesn't go the way you expect it to at all. Watching either American or Indian films, like, you kind of have this preconceived notion as to how a film might go, how it might transpire, how it might play out. Over the course of it, you realize this is a very different film from what you're used to. At the end, it's like, wow, that was a very fascinating film, and you called it existentialist in a way, or existential experience in a way.
I felt like it was essentially talking about the journey through pain for most of the characters, how they process pain. It's a very personal journey, but the language of pain is universal. That was so clear in this movie.
I don't want to say how pain exists in the film, because in case you guys watch it, I don't want to say what exactly happens, but it certainly comes through clear in a very real way. There are moments of crying that transpire in the film, and I'm like, whoa, I recognize that cry. I've done that cry. That was pretty rough. Oh boy. Oh, that's a very like true to life cry. What it reminded me of is what I experienced when my father passed away. Like, the day after my dad passed away, I woke up and had that exact same kind of cry that one of the characters did in the movie. I was like, well, I don't know how he figured that out, but that's real. That's exactly what you do when you experience that kind of trauma. But overall, how did you feel about the movie? You knew nothing really about this beforehand.
Yes, I really came in with a completely blank state of mind and 0 expectations. All I had heard was that it's a great movie and you should watch it, and Vicky Kaushal is amazing and all of that. So I really wanted to watch it. Overall, it's not what you would expect from a Bollywood film. Everything was not obvious, it was not out there. There were a lot of moments that took you by surprise in its simplicity, which I really loved. It's not something that happens often in Bollywood.
Do you think the compliments that people were telling you about the film had merit?
Yes,
Okay.
for sure.
Just to let you guys know in advance, there is some real intense stuff going on in this movie. Some so intense that I would not have even been able to appreciate had I not watched it with you, because you were expressing some of those things along the way. You were like, wow, like like, this is something I'm not used to watching, etc.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, because like being an American, I'm used to watching the, intense stuff.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to hear your perspective on it at the same time. So we're going to move into spoilers. So if you guys haven't seen it yet, definitely shut this off, go watch the film and come back to this part. The thing you wanted to talk about was Vicky Kaushal's character.
Yes, and so many moments in the movie with him. The 5 stages of grief that he sort of goes through, which is shock, denial.
All those stages.
All those stages. You
Yes.
can look that up
Yeah.
on Google.
They certainly show it to you in the film.
Yeah, it's very pronounced.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that is sort of the focus of the narrative. It's his grief, and in parallel you have Richa Chadha's grief.
The whole film is about grief at the end of the day, and then
Grief
coming out the
and
other
guilt.
side.
In Richa Chadha's case, it was also guilt.
Yeah.
Somewhere she's clear that she should not have to take the responsibility of this guy's suicide, but at the same time there is also conflict where there are a lot of external forces telling her to take responsibility or sort of imposing that on her. She's conflicted, but at the same time there is some clarity, and then how she toggles between the two and she processes through that, and then she breaks down.
Right.
I thought was very nuanced, because that's what happens, right? Like when you are in a difficult situation and you go back and forth, like you can't skip that process when you're processing grief. And that bargaining is something that in cinema, like in movies, it can sometimes be really hard to emote. It can sometimes be very hard to like write. So hats off to the writers, to the director, and to the actors who did such a good job in bringing that emotion forward.
What you're talking about is actually very interesting, because one of the things I noticed in Bollywood films is it goes one of two ways. Either you have an actor that overpronounces their emotion, or you have an actor like Nawazuddin Siddiqui who's very understated in what he's feeling. And here, the whole film is very understated. All the actors, the whole cast, the story, the dialogue, all of it's very understated. And I like that about it, because like I said earlier, it makes it feel more real. And like you were saying, you have to really pay attention to what's going on with the actors, because there's a lot that's happening internally that is not being outwardly spoken. It all kind of comes to the head at the end when, like you said, she breaks down. And one of the things that I loved about this was, normally what you have is at the end of a picture, it's like everyone's happy and hunky-dory, and you're thinking like these two characters are going to meet up like at the 30-minute mark, fall in love, and etc. I thought that maybe Richa was going to meet Vicky Kaushal, and then there was going to be like a love triangle. I didn't expect it to be a thing where they meet at the very end of the film. The arc of it is they learn to accept their grief, and they learn to accept that pain and then move on from it together.
And also recognizes, because towards the end of the movie, like the last 10 minutes is all about recognizing pain, where Vicky Kaushal has sort of gone through the process, and then he sees someone else going through the process and he recognizes it, and also takes a step to like care for that person. He just offers water, but sometimes when someone is processing through grief, like that's what you want to do. You just want to be there, even if it's passive. You know, I thought that was such a clever way of depicting that.
There was something you said about the river and it being a point where the colors don't mesh together.
Right.
And it being kind of symbolic of these two characters as well.
I'm trying to remember the two rivers. I think it's Yamuna and it's Ganga and Yamuna. The two rivers, please, like, don't hate me if I got the two rivers wrong. I've never been there, but from wherever I remember of my geography, it's Ganga and Yamuna that meet at this certain point. If you take a helicopter ride over that point, you can very clearly see the difference in the colors of the two rivers. And they don't actually merge and mix into each other. It's very distinct, and you can see the two colors from the top. That point is called the Sangam. Sangam has been talked about in a lot of Bollywood movies, and that's how I've heard so much about it. My parents have talked so much about it. I liked that they used that as a metaphor towards the end, where the two people going through their own journey of pain recognize that and meet, and then take off to go and see the Sangam.
It's almost symbolic of the entire film if you think about it. You're saying it's two colors that don't ever mix, and they're right up against each other the entire time, right?
Yeah.
And so the story is like that. It's like those two rivers the entire time. And you see both of them very distinctly.
Yeah.
If you never told me that, I wouldn't have got that symbolism.
That's why we should watch more movies together.
We should only watch movies together.
Yes.
This is our second date. We're doing all right so far. I'm only going to watch movies with Ananya for the rest of my life.
I want to talk about the father, Richa Chadha's father.
Okay, yes. He has his own arc in the story too. Well, acting-wise, I thought he was really good. It was well played, and I could see where he was coming from. Like, you understand right away what his background is and what he believes in. It's very easy to see where he's coming from and why he does what he does, and where the conflict comes into play, because she is more of a modern girl. She just was curious and did this thing, and it erupted in a huge disastrous way that she could not have anticipated. His reaction to all of this, hitting her, whatever it might be, while I didn't agree with him, I understood it. That was my feeling about him. Like, I thought he was well performed, and I thought he was well written.
He was one of those characters without which, like, the movie obviously wouldn't exist. I mean, wouldn't stand. There was just so many layers to his character. While he was this distressed dad who didn't know how to handle his daughter's situation, he was also this, like, cheerleader for that kid, and he was able to, like, balance both of those roles rather beautifully.
He had a lot to overcome in the film, actually, because he had to deal with his daughter's situation, that 300,000 rupee debt. He had to deal with his daughter leaving because he didn't want her to leave. He didn't want her to move out. And then he had to deal with the kid in that situation. Like, he had a back and forth, because initially he told the kid no, and he agreed, and then he felt the trauma of almost losing that kid. He went through a lot over the course of the movie. So all three of these characters were very well constructed. Their journey was well written. I thought that all of that was great. And the last thing I guess I want to talk about is, well, two things. Is number one is the music. And number two is the cinematography, the way it was shot. It was very simple in the way it was shot. I don't know if you noticed that stuff. Like, the scene construction in terms of camera work was very, very simple. And I actually really liked that, because it just allowed you to appreciate what was happening, almost like a fly on the wall. It wasn't doing shaky cam stuff. It didn't have too many setups in terms of camera angles. It was all just mostly like just a couple of angles, enough to let you know what was going on. Now, that could be for one of two reasons. It could be that it's low budget, or it could be that that was just the way the director saw it, and it could be a confluence of both. Either way, I thought that was nice, and the DP did a great work with the colors and whatnot.
I thought it was very fitting. I don't know a lot about camera work, and I don't know a lot about cinematography, but it felt like very fitting to the narrative. It was not over the top. It was, again, very fitted, like muted and... Yeah, I'm not an expert.
No, that's actually a good point. Like, in terms of like the writing, the acting, the dialogue, it's all muted, as well as the cinematography, because the camera work was very
simplistic.
The
music, there are very few songs.
Right. The last thing I was gonna talk about was the music, because there was no, like, musical numbers in the film.
Like, pause, let's go.
Yeah, it was nothing like that, because it would have broken the reality of the movie. I did like the music that was there. I did feel like it helped guide the emotion of the film instead of pulling you away from it in order to, like, sell this CD over here.
Yeah.
Like, or download soundtracks, whatever the case may be.
And I think it was very intentional. I think that some of the choices that were made in this movie, whether it was the cast, whether it was the cinematography, it felt very intentional, rather controlled, and like a tighter grip on the narrative, when you compare it to, like, other movies where the grip's not so tight. And so there's stuff coming in, and,
There was one other thing I forgot to mention. Vicky Kaushal's acting is always on point for me. It was just amazing to me to see him, almost like a chameleon, go into this role, because the last thing I watched was Uri, where he's like this super soldier guy. Yeah. I mean, not a super soldier, but he's a commander, right? Leading his troops across the border into Pakistan. Like, to see him now in this, where he's the complete antithesis, where he's this very, like, humble, innocent kid. One of the things you mentioned was how a lot of these guys will memorize a poem or a pickup lines, and he didn't do any of that. I believed him in his performance of that person. I feel like Vicky Kaushal is one of those super talented actors that could literally do that so well. I just wanted to say that one more time, because I think that kind of goes underappreciated. Like, a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, it was very grounded. One of the things that I really liked, one of the moments in the movie, was every time that he would get excited, whether he saw the girl or whether he saw her doing a gesture like leaving the balloon in the air or whatever, even emotion of excitement that he had to convey was also not over the top, it was just very innocent. That is so hard. I'd imagine that would be, like, really so hard for an actor to convey.
It's easier to play the bigger,
just those very implied emotions. Those are things that we catch when we're in a room. That's the energy that we catch. Or these are like glances that we catch in order to read the room. When I was seeing the movie, I was like, the camera was catching some of those.
That's a good way to put it.
Emotions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's the ability to do nothing that makes him so strong, because there's this compulsion to do more, and he knows how to not do that. He knows how to overcome that compulsion and keep it simple, but still convey it, even in his simple actions, like when he's on the bed looking at the Facebook printed photo.
That was rather cute.
It takes us back into the writing. Every situation in the film, you understood where it was going, why it was going there, and you bought every second of it. And the very last thing I wanted to mention was the girl, because I don't know her name. Like, the IMDb doesn't have the photos for all the names, but the girl playing his girlfriend. I thought she was awesome, because there was this restrained behavior that she was doing in the movie that was like so real. Like, I felt like I was watching something actually transpire for the first time. That's how good her acting was to me. The kind of hesitant response, it didn't feel like a put on. It felt like this is an actual girl hesitating in a response. She's actually reluctant because she would be, as opposed to the director had to talk with her. It says so in the script. I thought she was very, very well chosen. I hope to see more of her.
There was also a lot of strength in her character, along with some of the hesitation that came from being a girl in a small town. There was also a lot of strength that she showed when she was like, yeah, even if we have to run away, like, I'm down. That was just said so, like, nonchalantly. Like, if I gotta do this, I gotta do this.
I think the kissing scene in this film was the first time I've smiled at a kissing scene in years. Not since I've watched Friends and Chandler and Monica getting married. Like, or getting engaged, I should say. It's been so long since I've seen a kiss in a movie and actually smiled and laughed in a positive way, because the way Vicky Kaushal and the actress opposite of him played it, it felt like a genuine first kiss. I felt like I was reliving high school or something, just watching these characters go through the thing. Vicky Kaushal's nervousness in approaching that kiss, I'm like, yeah, I know that. I know the feeling, the hesitance and all that stuff. And the plot twist of her dying was just like crazy.
Yeah, I was not expecting that at all.
I knew something like that was coming. I just didn't know how it was going to happen. Because I was like, okay, thinking about his profession of being this guy who burns bodies on the pyres and whatnot, I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if he had to do that for her? I thought that.
Oh, wow,
and then no sooner than I thought that, she was right there in front of him, and like he saw the ring, and I was like,
that's
oh,
pretty
boy.
Amazing. My brain didn't even go there. So.
And the use of that ring was so smart from a writer's perspective. I was like, okay, so they set this up as this thing that's on her hand, then you see it on her body, and then it's used as a jewel to help resolve the issue later on in the book. I was like, the way all of this came together was brilliant.
You called it on the ring.
Yeah, I did.
It's like that ring.
Yeah, well, because he chucked it in the river where the boys go swimming, so it seemed like an obvious, through.
Little segue. Yeah.
But anyways, you guys, really, really like this movie a lot. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thank you for listening to Aninya. Usually at this point I say, check them out on the social media. But
it's fine.
Aninya just wants you to watch her on Jaby's channel. So she is a Jaby KOAY exclusive.
I'm not very active on social media, so.
That's okay.
Yeah. I'm not a content creator or.
Yes. Well, you are now.
I just love watching movies.
Yeah. Now we're gonna move on to date number 3. Y'all have a good one. Thanks so much for hanging out. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Check out our other reactions, reviews, and short films. I'm Jaby KOAY. This is
Aninya.
Peace out.